My Lord and my God, I firmly believe that you are here, that you see me, that you hear me. I adore you with profound reverence. I ask you for pardon of my sins and grace to make this time of prayer fruitful. My Mother Immaculate, Saint Joseph, my Father and Lord, my guardian angel, intercede for me. Jesus, there are some words of yours in today's Gospel that really strike me, that are inspiring for me, really. We're told that the apostles said to you, to the Lord, "Increase our faith." And you, Jesus, replied, "If you had faith as a grain of mustard seed, you could say to this sycamore tree, 'Be rooted up and be planted in the sea,' and it would obey you." It's an amazing simile, Jesus. You're such a good teacher that a tree would be uprooted and planted in the sea on the basis of my faith. This is something extraordinary. It's a very powerful simile. Jesus, along with the apostles, straight away in my own prayer now, I want to say to you, please increase my faith. Because the first way we have of growing in faith is to ask for an increase in this virtue. Faith is a theological virtue. It comes from God, it leads to God, it is of God, and therefore it's a gift that we can receive only from you, Jesus. And that's why with the apostles, with the disciples, with my whole heart, I want to say to you now, Jesus, increase my faith, because there's so many things I want to pray for, so many people I want to pray for, so many intentions, so many good things I'd like to see happen. And I know that if I had more faith, perhaps I would see greater miracles. That's what you seem to be exhorting us to do, exhorting me to do. How can we grow in faith? Such a fundamental virtue. How can you grow in faith? How can I grow in faith? In the first place, asking. It is a gift. So, Jesus, once again, I know I'm repeating myself, but in my prayers sometimes I need to. I ask you for faith. And then we grow in faith also by making acts of faith. What does that mean? It can be saying a prayer called an act of faith. There are many such formulae. But we could also make many acts of faith simply by living a life of faith. Putting one foot in front of another in a life of faith. Living with faith. Behaving with faith. That's also how we grow in faith. And here there's an important point to meditate on, which is that our faith is not fundamentally a matter of feelings. Sometimes we might feel great enthusiasm for the faith. Sometimes I might feel, in a special way, I could feel the closeness of the Lord's presence. I can feel the touch of divine love. I can feel, as it were, or I can perceive the workings of providence in my life and in the life of other people. But more often than not, we may feel nothing. And our emotions may be dead, as it were, or neutral, or even cold. And sometimes we know this, Lord, from the history of the church and from the experience of many Christians down through the centuries. You let this happen. It can be a trial of faith. What seems so clear, what we could feel so palpably, we don't see or we don't feel so much anymore. It's what's sometimes called the chiaroscuro of faith, the clearness and the darkness of faith. Sometimes in the life of faith, we experience more the clearness, the lucidity, the certitude on an emotional level. Other times, we feel and we experience darkness. We feel the mysterious side. But that doesn't mean, Lord, that I've lost my faith. It means maybe that my emotions are not in tune as much with my intellect. It means perhaps that you are testing my faith a little bit and making me rely a bit more on you. Sometimes when I don't feel my faith so much, I'm being purified. I'm being taught in a deep way that faith is fundamentally a divine gift. And that's a wonderful thing because it leads me back to you. It helps me to rely much more on you. And that's always a good thing. In the Second Vatican Council, we are taught that By faith, the human being commits his entire or her entire being to God. And right now in my prayer, I want to do that, Jesus. I want to commit my entire being to you, no matter how I feel. And sometimes it can be hard because many of us were surrounded by good friends and relatives who do not believe or who have great difficulty believing. And naturally, that can affect us. It can affect us psychologically. It can affect us emotionally. But our Lord will never let us lose the gift of divine faith that he has given us in baptism once we want to believe, once we want to hold on to this gift. We have in our own times an outstanding saint who underwent, you might say, a great purification in her life, an extraordinarily faith-filled life, and yet a life that was mysterious, that was a sharing in the cross through a real trial. And that person I'm speaking about, and I'm sure she's close to us now in our prayer in the Great Communion of Saints, that person I'm speaking about, of course, is St Teresa of Calcutta, who, of course, was an outstanding apostle of the contemporary church. And she, as a young woman, as a young religious, she had a great palpable sense of the Lord's love and a very warm perception of God's love for her. And as we know, she joined a teaching order, the Loreto nuns, and went to India as a missionary there and was working for quite a number of years in one of the Loreto schools there, teaching girls. And then she was on the train one day on her way to do her annual retreat, and you, Jesus, spoke to her and told her to begin something new. It was like a vocation within her vocation. She saw it like that. And she launched out. She had to get permission from no one less than the Pope to begin a new adventure which we now know and really love in the church as the missionaries of charity, who are doing so much good, bringing Jesus to the poorest of the poor. But what's very striking about Teresa of Calcutta, and perhaps it's something that was discovered after her death more than any other time, is that for most of her life, and particularly from that moment on, pretty much after the moment of the foundation of the Missionaries of Charity, she interiorly felt cold and dark, and she felt a great loneliness. She didn't have that same perception of faith, that same warmth of the contact of God, you might say, in her subjective experience. And that for her was a huge trial. This can be read about in the book written by the postulator of her cause. It's a book called Come Be My Light. And her whole mission and her whole vocation was to bring the light of Jesus to people who were in darkness. But somehow she discovered over the years, and it was a great suffering, a great purification, that her own interior experience of darkness was a sharing in the plight of the poorest of the poor, namely in the plight of those who don't have God. And over time, through prayer and through spiritual direction, she came to realize that that was part of her mission. That didn't take away the pain of it. But she eventually got to the point in her spiritual life where she said, I have come to love the darkness. I have come to love the darkness. And this is a great paradox. And why, Lord, we would say, Lord, why did you permit that in the life of such a great saint? A life which was completely full of faith. By faith, she, Teresa of Calcutta, committed her entire self to God. But she didn't have the consolation of the experience on the subjective or emotional level of that faith. And that was, for her, a real Calvary, a real sharing in the cross. And maybe that very cross made her apostolate, her work of evangelization, all the more fruitful. Jesus, why do these things happen? Maybe there's a particular grace for all of us in this. Maybe Teresa of Calcutta teaches us that faith is not a matter of feelings. It's a matter of deeds. It's a matter of what we do. It's a question of living by faith, no matter how we feel. Sometimes, Jesus, you do permit me great feelings of warmth and of faith and of enthusiasm. Other times, Jesus, you permit me to feel maybe cold, lonely, a bit alone. But I know you're with me. Jesus, increase my faith. I give you thanks, my God, for the good resolutions, affections, and inspirations you have communicated to me in this meditation. I ask you for help to put them into effect, My Mother Immaculate, Saint Joseph, my Father and Lord, my guardian angel, intercede for me.